Hi boys and girls, I'm here with our read aloud book. Today I'm going to be reading you chapter 12, which is called The Flood. "We have to get out," said Matt. "If I can get the ladder from the basement, we could use it to scale the wall. If I can just get in there without any of them seeing me, we could sneak away after lunch." They were sitting in the conservatory at the far end away from any listening ears. "We need a diversion," he said. "Something that will bring them all together, somewhere while I take the ladder." "I can do a fainting fit," said Sam. "I'm good at that. It used to come in useful at school when we had hockey." "I can't see them all rushing to your aid just for a faint." "No, you're right. They all hate me. They'd probably be glad I was quiet for a while." "You're right there." She glared at him. The heat of the conservatory was making him feel sick. He felt trapped and irritable and without a single idea. They could light a big fire in the kitchen. "That's pretty dangerous. The whole house could burn down." "Maybe a small one then," said Sam. "If it's small, Irene could probably put it out on her own." "Well, you think of something." "I can't," he admitted. Out on the terrace, Irene was watering tubs of geraniums with a hose. They watched as the sparkling water hit the geranium leaves and sprayed over the flagstones. "I've got it! What about a flood?" Upstairs in one of the bathrooms, Sam grinned mischievously. "Actually, there's one right over the dining room. If the water soaked through the ceiling right on lunchtime, that should put them all in a tizzy and you should be able to sneak away." "Brilliant, but we'd better start it now. It's already 11. Even with the taps and the full pressure on the huge Victorian bathtub took ages to fill. Impatient as always, Sam brought a large jug from the landing and began bailing water out of the wash basin and pouring it onto the floor. They had taken the precaution of removing their shoes and socks and rolling up their sleeves, but Sam got excited and began to splash water at Matt. "Stop it, we don't want any evidence on us," said Matt. "And for heaven's sake, be quiet. We don't want them to hear us." By 11:30, the bath was overflowing. Sam turned the tap to a quiet trickle, bailed out the last of the water in the hand basin, and pulled out the plug. The water was already spreading across the floor and finding its own level. They gazed at it with satisfaction. "They're all going to get a lovely surprise later," said Sam. They closed the door and retreated to Sam's bedroom to put on their socks and shoes. "But what about the great aunt?" "She'll still be in her room. I have to make sure I'm not in the view of her window when I get on the ladder." "Her room looks over the front of the house," said Sam, "and the basement doors are on the back. You'll be okay." At lunch, Irene brought in bowls of salad, a basket of bread, and a platter of mixed cold meats. Mr. Cooper poured wine, large glasses for himself and Mrs. Cooper, and Mr. Higgins. "Orange juice, Matt?" asked Sam. She gave him a wicked smile. "Or would you rather have water?" Lunch was as silent as dinner the previous night. Mr. Higgins ate little. He appeared deep in thought as he cut up and moved a slice of smoked chicken around his plate. The Coopers said nothing either. Mr. Cooper looked tired and bored, while Mrs. Cooper's glance flitted anxiously from face to face. Matt resisted the temptation to stare up at the ceiling. Surely the bathroom flood should have soaked through by now. He checked his watch. They had been sitting at the table for 20 minutes. And then, in the silence, he heard the first loud plop. With perfect aim, a drop of water had penetrated the ceiling and fallen into Mr. Higgins' glass of wine. Sam had to stifle a giggle as he stared at it in disbelief. It was soon followed by more plops of water, seeped through in various places, and trickled down the salad, the bread, the drinks, and the bowl of fruit into the center of the table. "What?" Mr. Higgins sprang to his feet. He glared at Sam and Matt. "Has someone left the tap on?" They stared at him back innocently. But the result of Sam and Matt's effort was even more spectacular than they had hoped. Suddenly, with a tremendous crash, the chandelier in a large part of the ceiling collapsed onto the table, showering crystals all over the room and spraying everyone with sodden pieces of plasterboard. "What is this?" Mr. Higgins brushed at his dark jacket. Mrs. Cooper screamed for Irene, then all three dived for the door. "Go," whispered Sam, "out the French window." And Matt raced into the garden. He prayed that the door leading out from the basement was unlocked, and it was. The basement was empty, and he grabbed the ladder from the tool room. The ladder was the fold-up type, easier to conceal but heavy to carry. It knocked painfully against his shins as he struggled up the basement steps to the yard above. He managed to reach a large clump of evergreens a short distance from the back of the house and thrust the ladder into its midst. He was panting when he got back to the dining room and then had to pause for a moment or two to control his breathing. He looked at his watch. It had taken him 10 minutes. Had he been missed? Inside the room, there was a strong smell of wet carpet, and his feet crunched on fallen crystals. Towels and newspapers were strewn around the room to soak up the water, and flakes of white plaster speckling the furniture. Sam and Mr. Higgins were just returning. "I'm sorry," Sam was saying. "I just fancied a bath and then I got distracted. It could happen to anybody." "No, Samantha," he said through gritted teeth. "Only to you, and look at the damage you have caused." "I'm sorry," she said meekly, "but we can get someone in to repair the ceiling, can't we?" "The ceiling can wait." He unbuttoned his jacket and took it off, showing a gray and white striped shirt and red braces. "Tsk, my jacket is ruined." Behind his back, Sam looked at Matt, one eyebrow raised. He gave her a thumbs-up sign. In the commotion, no one noticed the incessant buzzing until there was one of those sudden silences where everyone stopped speaking at the same time. "It's the gate!" yelled Sam as she ran from the room, hotly pursued by Mr. Higgins, the Coopers, and Matt. Sam got to the hall first and grabbed the phone that connected the Manor gates to the house. "Who is it?" she shrieked. Mr. Higgins tried to snatch the phone, but she danced away from him. "Mrs. Bailey, how are you? It's Sam here." "Yes, of course you can come in. I'm just pressing the button now." Mr. Higgins glared at her. "Who is this Mrs. Bailey, and what does she want?" "Oh, of course you wouldn't know, would you?" smiled Sam. She turned to the Cooper. "But you know, don't you?" They stared at each other helplessly. "Mrs. Bailey?" Sam repeated. "From the Women's Institute? She organizes the village festival every year. It's always held here. It's one of the biggest local events of the year. Dog show, a jazz band, competitions, a disco in the evening. Great fun." "And when is this village festival?" asked Mr. Higgins. "Oh, you don't have to worry," said Sam. "It's not for another 2 or 3 weeks, the 3rd Saturday in August. I expect Mrs. Bailey just wants Mommy and Daddy to okay the plans. They don't actually have to do anything, except declare it open, of course. A gang from the village come and do all the preparation, putting up stands, lights, and so on. There'll be lots of them here," she said with satisfaction. "I expect they'll want to start any day now." Matt saw the glances of dismay between the Coopers. "Well, she cannot come in," said Mr. Higgins. "The gate mechanism is still out of order." But at that moment, the doorbell rang, and Sam opened the door to a small, panting figure, a bulging bag under her arm, a straw hat rammed on the back of her head. "My goodness," she said. "I'm all out of puff. I swear your drive gets longer every year." Mrs. Cooper took a breath and moved forward. "Mrs. Bailey, how nice to see you again." "Oh, how formal. Molly, please. You always call me Molly," laughed Mrs. Bailey. "Molly, of course. But how did you get in?" asked Mrs. Cooper. Mrs. Bailey waved a hair clip triumphantly. "Never fails," she said. "But you want to get my Andy to see that gate. Always going wrong, it is." "I'm afraid you've caught us at a difficult moment. Our dining room ceiling has just fallen down." "An accident with the plumbing," added Mr. Cooper. "Oh my goodness, let's have a look." Mrs. Bailey pushed her way across the hall. "Oh my word," she gasped as she stood in the doorway of the dining room. "You'll be wanting my Andy to see to that too. I'll get him to come along in the morning." No, said Mr. Higgins quickly. "We would not dream of troubling him. We will call someone in from town." Mrs. Bailey looked up and down. "And who might you be?" she asked sharply. "Not from these parts, are you? Else you know we don't give our business elsewhere if we can help it." "No, Andy will be here tomorrow and he'll do a good job. You mark my words." "No." Mr. Cooper stood up. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Bailey, Molly, but I'm afraid it will have to wait. We have something urgent to deal with over the next few days." "Oh, well." Mrs. Bailey pulled her coat closer and rammed her hat further onto her head. "In that case, if you're going to be so busy, we'd better deal with the paperwork for the festival today, Mrs. C." And turning tail, she marched off to the drawing room, settled herself on one of the sofas, and tipped the contents of her bag onto the coffee table alongside. The Coopers followed helplessly. "I'd hoped she realized they're not my real parents," Sam whispered gloomily to Matt. "She's known them since I was 8, but she seems to have taken in just like everyone else who's been here. I suppose when you're expecting to see someone and they look the same, there's no reason to be suspicious." They hovered in the doorway while Mrs. Bailey went through the details of the festival with the baffled Coopers. "I'm going to write her a note," whispered Sam. "I'll sneak it to her when she leaves." She slid back in the hall and tiptoed across to the library. When she returned, she gave Matt a glimpse of a tightly folded piece of paper. At last, Mrs. Bailey gathered together her various notes and lists, stuffed them into her bag, and rose to her feet. Sam rushed forward and flung her arms around the astonished woman. "Lovely to see you again, Mrs. B," she said. "Give my love to Mr. B and Andy." "Well, my word, it's nice to see you too, Sam. Will you be here for the festival?" "You bet," said Sam. At the front door, Mrs. Bailey paused. "Now where did I put my specs?" Sam and Matt held their breath as she rummaged through her large bag. "Always misplacing them," she muttered, and then her hands were searching for her coat pockets. "They're on your nose," said Mr. Higgins with a cold politeness. "So they are. Now what's this?" She had pulled out Sam's note from her pocket and was unfolding it. "Dear me," she said. "May I see?" asked Mr. Higgins. He took the note from her and scanned it. Sam gripped Matt's hand. "I must apologize for Samantha," said Mr. Higgins after a long moment. "She is not herself at the moment. In fact, she has been brought home early from school to recuperate. I am her temporary tutor. As you can see, she is suffering from some rather strange delusions." Mrs. Bailey gave Sam an uncertain glance. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, dear." "She is receiving the best of attention," said Mr. Higgins smoothly. "A specialist from London. Rests in of course a couple of tablets. That is all she needs. And now, Mrs. Bailey, perhaps Mr. Cooper will see you to the gate." After Mrs. Bailey had gone, he turned to Sam, his face tight with anger. "What are we to do with you? Such a troublemaker. You cannot believe anyone will take your fancy seriously." He shook his head. "Even your friend Matthew is tired of your behavior and wishes to leave. Isn't that so, young man?" Matt nodded. "Well, tomorrow we will most certainly contact your uncle and arrange for you to be collected." Matt nodded again. He wondered gloomily why Mr. Higgins was still keeping up the pretense. It was quite obvious that he had no intention of letting either him or Sam go. In the meantime, Mr. Higgins continued, "How can we entertain you while Samantha spends a quiet hour in her room?" "I don't need entertaining. I'll stay with Sam." "I think not," said Mr. Higgins. "I think it is best if you spend some time apart. There is a library full of excellent books across the hall. Perhaps you would like to use the time by improving your knowledge." Not an exciting prospect, but Matt thought it might give him another opportunity to escape. "All right," he said. After Mr. Higgins had left, he checked the door. He wasn't surprised to find it was locked. The library was a large room with windows on two sides, surrounded by bookshelves. Matt estimated there must be several thousand books at least, and wondered if the Coopers, the real Coopers, had read them all. Without much hope, he crossed to the windows. He thought it unlikely that they would have left one of them unlocked, but patiently he began to check the casements. His patience was rewarded. One of the upper casements, large enough for him to climb through, had been left on the latch. Across the room, he saw a combination stool and steps, tall enough to enable him to reach it. In less than a minute, he was outside, throwing himself behind one of the seats on the terrace while he checked if he had been seen. He would stay out of sight until he was absolutely sure all the others were in the house. He was about to leave his hiding place when Mr. Higgins and Irene appeared. Mr. Higgins was carrying a bulky bag over his shoulder. The pair looked around carefully before they set off across the lawn. Where were they going? What were they up to? Deciding to follow them, Matt dodged from bush to bush, careful to keep out of sight of the house windows. They were making for the ruined abbey. Just outside the walls of the abbey, there was an area of broken stone paving, overgrown with weeds and brushwood and self-seeded shrubs. The two stopped there, and Matt flung himself down amongst a crop of brambles and nettles, just before Mr. Higgins turned to survey the landscape. "Ouch," Matt whispered silently, but he forced himself to stay motionless until Mr. Higgins was satisfied. Irene bent and pulled away the brushwood, and Mr. Higgins produced a key. Matt raised his head cautiously. He watched as Mr. Higgins undid a padlock and heaved into a sturdy trap door. He held his breath as the two descended into whatever lay below. So this was where they were holding the real Coopers. It made sense. Out of sight, out of hearing, he guessed, yet close enough for the gang to control. But what was below the trap door? There must be a tunnel, he decided, leading into the old abbey ruins. Would there be a crypt? Sam had told him that the abbey was unsafe and no longer used, but perhaps the crypt was still intact. A perfect hiding place. And once the gang had what they wanted, an even more perfect burial place for the bodies, the Coopers, Sam himself. They would all be killed and hidden below the ground. Matt guessed that Mr. Higgins had planned a false trail already. The fake Coopers would make a great show of returning to Argentina. As for Samantha, well, it would be easy to spread word that she had gone to stay with friends. No one would suspect the truth. He felt sick. There was nothing he could do, or was there? He raised his head again. There was no sign of Mr. Higgins and Irene, and he could see that they had closed the trapdoor behind them. If he could lock the pair in the crypt, that would give him time to get the ladder, and him and Sam could make their escape. Once they were free, they would somehow contact the police and lead them back to the manor. Surely the police would believe the two of them. He crept closer to the trap door and reached for the padlock. It was not there. Mr. Higgins, it seemed, thought of everything and had taken it below with him. Matt hovered, bitter with disappointment, unsure of what to do next. There might still be time to get away on his own, and he was tempted to have a go. On the other hand, he could leave without letting Sam know her parents were here. How could he do that? He would have to go back to the house, he decided. That is the end of chapter 12. I would like you to comment what you would do if you were in this situation. What do you think Matt should do? It's been an interesting couple of chapters. We found out a lot of new information about Sam's family and about the manor itself and the people that are there. So I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you were in Matt's position?